Hey everybody, welcome back. So you've bought yourself an inexpensive Chinese welder and you don't know how to weld and you don't know how to set it up. What do? Well, you know what? Let's go back a step or two. Let's say you haven't bought one yet and you don't know how to weld, but you've been watching YouTube videos like some of mine and you think this is really cool to be able to build stuff out of metal and you'd like to learn how to weld and get a welder, and you now see you can get one from China for 120 bucks. So the time is right, right? What should you do? Well, the first thing you should do if you haven't bought a welder yet and you don't know how to weld is go to the local vocational school and take a 20, 30-hour welding course. Doesn't cost a lot of money. You will learn. If the instructor is good, you'll learn almost everything you need to know to get started. That's what I did back when I started welding years ago. If that option is not available to you or you can't afford it, find a buddy who can weld and who's got a couple different welders and they'll show you the basics, and you can weld long enough through his hood until you can start to see the weld properly and know what to look for. Or go down to the local welding shop, buy a Miller or a Hobart or a Lincoln welder from them. It's not too hard to figure out. If you're doing the kind of stuff I'm doing, you know, get a welder, get a flux core or regular MIG welder. Now with a regular MIG welder, you're going to have to use gas, and you know, gas bottles are expensive and they'll leak down even when they're not being used, and it's expensive to fill them. So most of you are probably going to go flux core. Buy a decent one from them. They will have resources. They will have a good welding supply store, will have somebody you can call, will help you get it set up, give you advice. They might even have a place where you can go down and they can show you how to use one. If that's not an option to you, go to Harbor Freight. For God's sake, spend an extra $100 over what you would buy from a direct from China welder. Buy one from Harbor Freight. Harbor Freight's not going to help you get it set up and working, but it will come with some decent instructions. It will come with with a setup guide, and there's a lot of aftermarket third-party video support for Harbor Freight welders. But let's say you're not doing any of that. Let's say you've gone out and bought that $120, $130, $140 Vevor, Simder, or any one of another 20 different brand names directly from China. You got it home, you opened it, it's got no instructions, or they're in China. Google Translate sucks. It's not going to make any sense to you. There's not even any basic setup instructions, you know, settings on it, and the settings on the front panel make no sense. Sometimes they're just 1 through 10 or A, B, C, D, E, F, G type of thing. You don't have any clue where to set them at. So what do? You go out to the internet and you find some poor schmuck like me who's done a review. I know how to weld. I went to welding school. I did it for a living for a while, and I've done it for fun and my own purposes my whole life. So you go out, you find somebody like me on the internet, and somebody like me tells you it's a good welder, it works good, but they don't give you settings for it. Now, I don't give settings for a reason. In fact, I don't give settings for a couple of reasons. And this applies to 3D printers too, because my settings are probably not going to work for you for a couple of different reasons. One is you may not have bought the exact same machine as me. You may be a newer, even if it's still a Vevor MIG 130, it may be a newer version. The settings might be different. It's not going to work for you. So instead of telling you how to set the machine, I'm going to tell you how to learn to figure out how to set it yourself. That's what the goal of this video is going to be. And I'm going to use the Vevor MIG 130 for that. But honestly, this is going to apply to almost any similar inexpensive Chinese flux core welder, even the Harbor Freight ones. It will even apply to an expensive Miller, Hobart, Lincoln machine. You can walk up to any welding machine with a few pieces of scrap metal in your hood, and in 10 or 15 minutes or less, you can have that machine dialed in to run. Even a stick welder, it doesn't matter, because we're not using the settings on the machine. You don't even need to see the settings on the machine to do this. You could tape over all those numbers and indicators and it would not matter. We're going to be using 3 things: our eyeballs, our ears, and our brain. And that's what we're going to be used. Once you get a little experience, you'll find this is stupidly quick and easy to do, and you'll be welding. So with that being said, now that I've wasted all your time with that, let's get started. Before we go any further, there are some things I want to mention. First, if you're just starting out and you're just learning, don't try and learn on sheet metal. Don't try and learn on rusty metal or painted metal. Get yourself some decent scrap pieces. Go to any steel shop. Most welding shops will have scrap. They will sell you cheap. Or if all else fails, go to a steel shop and buy a 20-foot length of 2-inch wide by 1/8-inch flat bar. Probably set you back 20-25 bucks. It's a known quantity. It's not rusty. It'll be a good place to start. Next, get yourself some decent equipment. Get a decent hood. This is not a decent hood. This one from Harbor Freight for 40 bucks is not a decent hood. This is okay as an emergency hood, or let your friends watch you while you're welding, or if you break your other one, but come on. While you're first learning, don't make it hard on yourself. Get a decent hood. I'll put a link to this one below. This is a Yes Welder hood. This is a decent hood, maybe even a little better than decent. It's not a great hood. Great hood's going to set you back 300 or 400 bucks. You can pick these up for 80 or 90. Get a decent hood. Trust me. Don't make it hard on yourself while you're first trying to learn. Secondly, if your gun does not come, if you're using flux core and the gun doesn't have a tip like this on it, instead it has a tip like this on it, take this off and put a tip like this on it where you can see what you're doing and your view of the weld is not being blocked. Let me show you the difference. Assuming I can get this off of here, which I might not be able to. There we go. So this is what your gun may look like when you get it. This is what it may look like when you get it. You see how far back in there the tip is? This is for gas shielded wire, solid wire that requires gas shielding. This is a gas nozzle. It's hiding your tip. The only time you want to use this for flux core, if you're tacking and you can't see where you're tacking, or you don't want to bother putting a hood on to tack, you can just smack that down and pull the trigger. For everything else, you don't want that tip on it. You want this tip on it, because now we can see better what we're doing. Again, don't make it hard on yourself on purpose. Get a decent set of welding gloves. Yeah, the ones down at Harbor Freight for 5, 8, 9 bucks, they'll be okay to start with. But if you're welding a lot, you're not going to want to use them for long. Don't weld in a t-shirt, for God's sakes. You'll get sunburn all over your arms. If you do, don't complain to me. All right, with that being said, I think I also need to tell you that welding is as much of an art form as it is a mechanical type of thing. Some of it's mathematics and mechanical, sure, but a lot of it's art. The speed you're going, the distance you're holding, the angle you're at, how well you can see it. It's an art, you know, it's like a pencil drawing or playing guitar. You can watch a video on somebody how to tell you to set up a guitar and tune it, but that ain't going to make you a good guitar player. The same with an artist. An artist can tell you what pencils to buy, how to hold them in your hands and all that, but that don't mean you're going to draw like he does without a lot of practice. Welding is the same thing. It requires perseverance. Even with the machine set just right, you're going to fail over and over and over and over again, but you should get a little better every time. Don't throw it up. You know, learn how to deal with disappointment. Disappointment is just an impetus to try and do better next time, not to cuss things out, call people names, and run away screaming. Don't be like that. You're only hurting yourself. With that being said, let's look at the machine. First thing you'll notice when you buy one of these machines is the wire is going to be on a spool like this, or here's this old Harbor Freight one that I absolutely can't stand. It's got part way off it. I only use that as an emergency when I have nothing else. And you're going to have to put that spool of wire on, and that spool of wire is going to behind the side cover. Now, behind the side cover, yours may have pictures on it to help you figure out how to get this set up, and it may not. There may be pictures in the book, but there's a couple things to note. Pay attention to how this comes apart, what orientation the pieces are in and what order they go in. Secondly, under here where these feed wires are, you'll notice that this one down here, see if I can get your head in there so you can see it. This one down here has two grooves. One is going to be for 030 wire and the other is going to be for 035 wire, or 0.8 millimeter and 1 millimeter. It doesn't really matter which one you use, in my opinion. They both weld very similarly. Honestly, I've used both and I can hardly tell the difference. I stick with 030 for the most part because I do a lot of thinner things and I seem to think it works better on thinner stuff. Also, the wire wheel for this, make sure you're on the correct size for the wire you're using. That wheel should be marked. Also, make sure that wheel has serrations in the grooves. If it doesn't, it's for steel wire, not flux core wire. If you tighten this down too much, you'll crush flux core wire. So make sure you're on the right one. You want to be tight enough here for it to feed the wire through, but not so tight you crush the wire. Now, if you put it on the right one, put it in the right groove, and it's the correct serrated groove, you won't need to tighten it that much to feed through. If you have to tighten it too much, something's wrong, stop and look. Don't just keep going. Secondly, when you feed this through, make sure you're feeding it through so you get the most correct angle from the wire. Like if I had fed it through up here, I'd have some weird thing going in, so make sure that's right. Make sure you don't let loose of the wire once you cut it. Flux core wire is not as bad as steel wire. It won't go sprawling like mad when you release it, but it will still sprawling out to some degree. You 3D printer guys, just like not letting loose of your filament end. This needs to be tight enough to supply some drag, but not so tight that it can't feed it through. Again, a lot of this is just feel. You're just going to have to practice at it. When you feed wire through for the first time, take the tip off. Take a pair of pliers and unscrew the copper tip off of it and feed it through. Some people will tell you, and I have actually read it in instruction manuals, that once you snip off your wire, you should take a small file and file the end of it to get any burrs off it so it's not tearing the liner apart as it's feeding through. Probably a good idea, but I'm going to admit to you, I've never ever done it. That's all I think you need to know about in here. If something doesn't work right, if it's not feeding smoothly, this is the first spot you want to come to look at and make sure things are right. With the wire in and loaded and ready to go, we're going to go to some settings. And now, the settings on this machine, and a lot of people are going to tell you a lot of different things. Let me see if I can get that in the light a little bit better. A lot of people are going to tell you a lot of different things. This machine has a dial marked V and a dial marked A. It's safe to assume V is for voltage and A is for amperage. Some people will tell you that wire feed machines have no amperage settings. You will see a voltage and you'll see wire speed. And wire speed may be a number of inches per second, things like that. And voltage may actually be in voltage numbers. Wire feed machines, amperage is tied to wire speed. When you turn the wire speed up, the amperage goes up. Voltage can be its own dial and normally is on wire feed machines. And some of these machines, you can actually turn the voltage all the way down or all the way up with the voltage knob. Most of these inexpensive inverter flux core welders, the voltage is going to be also changed with the amperage and wire speed knob. And this voltage knob over here is just is fine tuning and nothing more. It's not going to make any huge differences. The manual that comes with your machine, if you bought a Miller, Hobart, Lincoln, whatever, will tell you that. The manual that comes with your Chinese welder, it might. The Simder welder did. The Vevor welder did not. The Simder welder actually came with a little bit more hand holding than this one does. This machine can also do stick welding and TIG welding, so you want to be sure you're set to the correct setting here. MIG 0.8 wire or MIG 1.0 millimeter wire. To start with on these, set the voltage knob right smack in the middle. There's no readout anywhere on this machine for what the voltage is actually set to, because you really can't change it. It's changed along with the amperage and the wire speed knob. And here, let me turn this thing on here. I was trying to keep it turned off because it does have a fairly loud fan. This machine defaults to the last thing you had it set to, which for me was MIG 0.8. So that is the size of the wire that I'm using. Notice voltage does nothing. And the amperage knob is going to change both amperage and wire speed. And notice this says Syn MIG, which means synergistic MIG, which means the voltage is tied to the amperage. So, and then this other little thing, OC, I think that just means whether it's overheated or not. Let me turn it back off again so you can hear me talk better. As if you want to, right? Okay, so now, with that being said, how are we going to set this machine? Again, I want to tell you, give yourself the best chance you can give yourself to get this to work. Clean, decent, mild steel. You want to make sure the ground is good. Most flux core machines are going to run the gun negative, and you're going to put the ground clamp in positive. That's for flux core. If yours can be switched, look at the wire you buy and see what the wire manufacturer's recommendation is. But almost all flux core wire I've found wants ground to be positive and the gun to be negative. If you're getting massive amounts of spatter, you probably have it set wrong if it can be set. This one can't be set any other way. The ground clamp has to be in negative, or excuse me, has to be in positive. There's a negative one there for when we hook the stick welder up, then we can run the stick welder however we want it through both of these, and the gun is not used at all. All right, with that being said, let's get some metal up here and let me tell you how I initially set these machines and what you should be looking and listening for. Okay, one last thing before we fire up the welder and do a little practicing is, you notice here I've written weld with an arrow to the right and gun with an arrow pointing to the left. And what I mean by that is our weld is going to progress from left to right, but we want our gun pointing back to the left into the weld puddle. Anytime you're using a stick or a wire that has flux, we're doing what's called dragging the weld. We're doing this as opposed to pushing it like that. And we're doing that because we're trying to keep the molten puddle of flux out of the molten puddle of steel, because we don't want slag or flux inclusions in our weld itself. As we go this way, and as the molten steel puddle cools and solidifies, the molten flux will move along with it and over it and protect it. But we do not want it inside, and that's why we're always going to drag. The angle you go at, I'm showing you something really extreme here, but we're not going to be welding like that. It's going to be more like that in this range somewhere. It doesn't have to be extreme. And I think the best way for you to start is to just run flat beads on something and try and do it about the same thickness of material that you're going to be welding on. Don't get a 1/2-inch piece of plate and set the machine to run sheet metal and think you're going to run good looking beads on that 1/2-inch piece of plate. You're not gonna. Stick with about the thickness that you're doing. I have 3 thicknesses of material here. This square tube is 1/16. This short piece of plate is 1/8. And this isn't quite 1/4. I think it's actually over 3/16. It might be 3/16. It's close to 1/4, maybe 30 thousandths less, in around that range, but I couldn't find anything floating around that was 1/4 that I just wanted to weld on. I also put some slices in it with my bandsaw so we could kind of get an idea of what filling a small gap would look like and the kind of penetration we're getting. As far as the heat is concerned, for sheet metal, this is probably 15 gauge, 16 gauge. For anything 16 gauge, 18 gauge, I'm going to recommend that you start on about 40 to 50 amps. And you'll know, if it's too hot, you're going to be blowing holes through it. You'll see it. If it's too cold, you're not going to get penetration. The weld will bead up on it like rainwater beating up on a car you just waxed, and you'll know it. The weld will be narrow, it will be tall. If it's too hot, the weld will be really wide and flat. This is something you're just going to have to get used to. The same with the angle and the speed you're traveling. It's just something you got to practice and get used to, or watch somebody doing it. Unfortunately, I don't have the means right now to let you guys look at the actual weld as I'm going. I used to have something I was using and I broke it and I haven't replaced it. Sorry. If it looks like that's something we want to do in the future, I'll recreate it. But for now, let's turn the welder on. Now, this voltage setting, first off, I think I've mentioned, make sure these settings for what type of welding you're doing are correct. This machine will do stick, TIG, and wire. So we want to make sure we're on MIG and 0.8, and that's what we're at. The voltage setting, you notice the voltage setting does not change this. And as I've mentioned, this is a synergistic MIG, meaning when I turn the dial up that changes wire feed and amperage, the voltage is going to be changing with it. This is more of a fine-tuning knob. My suggestion to you new welders, set that halfway up, and for a while, forget about it. You'll know later on as you get better if you need to fine-tune the voltage. And to put it simply, how you're going to tell is the wire should melt at a short distance from the weld itself, and it should stay steady. If it's melting back too fast toward the gun, you got too much voltage. If the wire actually feels like it's banging into the weld itself, you need more voltage. But for now, set it about in the middle and forget it for a little while. Later on, you'll come back to it. So we're going to weld on that thin stuff. So I'm going to go down, I said 40 to 50, so let's try 45. Now this is a 110 volt MIG. Whoops, that didn't right. That's all the way down to 35. I don't want that. And if it's too hot and you're burning through it, there's a couple different things you can do. One, you can turn the machine down. Two, you can go faster. Three, you can stitch weld it, weld little bits one spot, another little bit further away. Or you can weld a little, let it cool, weld a little, let it cool. I recommend stitch welding something for something like that. You can also grab something like this, a chunk of copper, and you can back it up if you're burning through. Honestly, turn the machine down or go faster, or stitch welding is what I would recommend. So we got that set at 45. Let's do some welding. Let's start on this thin stuff. Let's just run some flat beads and let's see what that setting looks like. Okay, I was a little cold there right at the beginning, but as I got going, I got a little bit better. Have I mentioned that I cannot weld in a straight line? I absolutely cannot weld in a straight line. I've never been able to. Now, when I have a seam, a gap, or like a butt weld, or a T-joint, something like that, I'm fine. But on a flat surface, I suck so bad at welding straight. I'm going to turn that up a little bit because I think that was slightly too low. Notice how it was beaded up there at the beginning. So I'm going to turn that up to 55. So here we are at 55. Let's try that again. All right, that's a lot better. Now, on something like a butt weld where I've got some gap, that might be too hot. But for there, that felt pretty good. Let's take a look at it. Also went a little slower. I wiggled the MIG back and forth just a little bit. One of my welding instructors used to say, weld like you've got a hangover, which means like your hands are shaking. Okay, that is a lot better. Notice how the weld is a lot flatter and a little bit wider, and it's not quite looking like it has beaded up on top of the surface. Let's try one of the cuts on this. I think 55 is going to be a little hot for that, but let's try it. Did I also mention that you want to keep about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch of stick out? I tend to go too short. I shouldn't, but I always tend to do that. So let's try this. I was wrong. That was almost perfect. I wandered off. I told you I can't weld straight. I lost sight of the seam for a few minutes, for a couple seconds, and I wandered off. Then I found it again and got right back on it. And yeah, that was pretty good. I went too fast and I got lost. Let's try another one. Okay, I burned through right there. So that might be a little hot. I went a little too fast that time, and that time I went a little too slow and I burned through. So let's kind of just go back up to speed, and we'll just kind of go faster. And I'm going back and forth across that joint because I don't want to stay in the joint. Yeah, that was slightly too hot for that speed. Might look okay. I got it filled. If you're burning through, stop welding for a few seconds and let it cool down, and then start welding and then stop and let it cool down. Go faster or turn your machine down. So that's not too bad. I mean, I'm not going to win any awards with that, but nonetheless, it's welded. So there's your setting for 16th. I would say 50 to 55 with the voltage set right in the middle. For this one here with that gap, I might have turned it down a little bit. I might even turn the voltage down a little, setting a little bit for that. Let's go up to the 8th. So for the 8th, I'm going to go up 10 more to 65. And let's see what kind of weld we get at 65. 66, close enough. So I'm going to weld a couple of more flat beads across it, and let's see what happens. You hear that sound? You hear how smooth and steady it is? That's the sound you're looking for. You want a smooth, steady sound. That actually sounds and feels pretty good to me. I'm liking that. Okay. That was a short bead, but I don't need to go any further. I'm running off the edge again. I'm telling you, I'm nothing if not predictable. Yeah, that heat setting for that was really good. I couldn't weld straight, but I mean, you're used to that for me by now. Let's try one of these cuts I put in it, and let's see how we're doing for that. See if I can see that. See if I get my head in the right position to see that cut. That would be a no. Let's try again. There it is. I see it. There we go. think. Well, that is really not showing up very well for me. That is not showing up well for me at all. Ah, I got it. Let's try this other one. This one's slightly bigger. Well, let's look at that one first. I really had trouble seeing that cut on that one. Could be a little bit hotter, but also I couldn't see the cut and I kept moving trying to find it. Let's see if I can do any better on this next one. Sometimes just getting your head in a position to see what you're welding is sometimes the most difficult part. Sometimes you only have to move a couple inches and all of a sudden it becomes clear. Let me make sure my nope, I'm still set at the lightness that I want, the darkness, you know, the shade that I want. I'm just having trouble seeing it today. If you can't see what you're welding, stop. Figure it out. This is just scrap metal, so it doesn't matter, but see, I can see this one really good. I'm going to loiter a little at the very beginning because I'm a little cold. And I'm going to wander back and forth in kind of a zigzag across that cut. Loving the sound of it though. It sounds really good. That's exactly what I want my welder to sound like. It's not sputtering, popping, it's not galloping, you know what I'm trying to say? It's a steady, even sound. That's much better. Just seeing the bloody thing helped a lot. That's much better. Very happy with that. I don't think I need to change that setting. For 1/8 inch, 65 worked really well. If you're doing a T-joint, you might want to turn it up. If you're doing a butt joint and it's beveled out really well, you might want to turn it down a little bit, but I think 65 is a great place to start. So here is our 3/16. I'm going to go from 66, I'm going to go all the way up to 86 on this because this is pretty thick. We're getting up near about the maximum I'd want to weld with this, so that's 90. Let's 90 might be a bit much for that. Let's come down. There's 85. So let's try 85 on it. We're doing the exact same thing. We're dragging. We're trying to go in a straight line. I know I'm already going to fail on that, but let's try it. Hear the difference in sound? That's much hotter. Still a nice, smooth, steady sound. I'm watching both my weld puddle and I'm watching the flux puddle behind it. I'm trying to ignore the smoke and the spark. And I'm just kind of weaving slightly back and forth, just so it doesn't look like it's all beaded up on me. That felt really, really good. I think that's a really good setting for that. And there you go. That's a really nice looking bead. That's the best bead I've run all afternoon. So that's very good. Let's weld some of those cuts up. Well, you know, we didn't look at the other one to see how well it penetrated. And it's not going to penetrate a cut like that really well. We'd really need to bevel it. But let's weld let's weld a couple of these cuts I made up. Now for some reason, I can see this one really, really well. That little spit there, that was my fault. Now for some reason, I see it again. So I was just about to say my cut disappeared, but I can see it again. Oh, I like that setting. That setting is nice. And every machine is different. Some machines will run super good at one heat setting and sputter and have problems with another. And you can adjust it out to some degree by changing the voltage. But some many times you just got to admit that different machines behave differently. And you got, that was hot. And you got to, funny story back to when I was in welding school. I was in welding school when I was in my 20s. And there was an old guy who was an instructor, probably about the age I'm at now. And his hands looked like solid scar and callus. And I remember picking up welding, you know, picking up something like this. And back then, you know, we were welding test plates with stick welders, picking up something like this to go show him because it was too hot to hold in my gloved hands. And he'd reach out with his bare fingers and pick it up, and there'd be smoke pouring off his fingers, and he'd go, "Oh yeah, that looks pretty good," and go to hand it back to me. Anyway, that turned out pretty well. So there you have it. That's a great setting. Again, you know, when you weld, if this was a butt weld, I'd want to put a pretty good V in that, because this machine just is not really hot enough to burn all the way through that. You know what, for fun, let's do, and I got to be careful, if I go up much over 100 here, I'll pop this breaker. But let's go up to 100, and let's see how it welds without a V in it. Let's see if we just see any difference in penetration. Oh yeah, that's nice and hot. That would probably be a fine setting for this. Whoop, what happened? Oh, I lost my ground there for a second. Yeah, that's a fine setting for this as well, but you can see how much heat I'm pouring into it. That might be just a wee bit too hot for this, but let's take a look at the weld it gave us. Have a look. Yeah, that is a lot of heat for that. You can see the difference in the weld. See how this one has that nice rounded hump to it, and this one's much more flat? That was really too hot. And I still didn't get penetration. So yeah, you're going to have to V this out to get penetration. Let me shut that machine off. Okay, so there you have it. Those are the 3 settings and the 3 thicknesses, and how I recommend you set this Vevor MIG 130 or any of these inexpensive Chinese flux core welders. You're probably going to set them the same way. The dials and stuff on the front may look a little bit different, but they're mostly going to weld the same, at least the 3 or 4 I've tried have. Now I know you're going to say to me, "But Chuck, I'm welding 24 gauge. This is the wrong tool to weld anything as thin as 24 gauge. Honestly, 18, fine. 20, you're really pushing it with a flux core welder in 20. Can you do it? Yes. But you're going to be triggering the gun on and off and on and off and on and off a lot. That works great with MIG, you know, with solid steel wire with gas shielding. But with flux core, it's kind of a pain in the tush, because the flux covers the weld, and you're going to have to clean that flux off before the arc will strike easily again. So honestly, while you can do it, I just feel that it's not the best tool for the job. If it's the only tool I had, I would certainly use it. So that's it for this video. I hope you guys got something out of this. If you'd like to see more of this, let me know, and I'll arrange, again, for a way to video welding. I kind of got in mind a way to do it, but I damaged my camera last time I tried, and I switched to an action camera, and I haven't got a new setup for that yet. But let me know if you want to see more of that. Hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope this filled a void. Many of you have been asking me for this, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye for now.